कहते हैं कि शॉर्ट कंटेंट दिमाग के लिए स्मोकिंग की तरह होता है, उसी पर्सपेक्टिव से लॉन्ग कंटेंट दिमाग के लिए एक ब्रेन वर्कआउट होता है. वेलकम टू TRS क्लास. Explain the term Asur to the West.
Sure. Why don't you give that a shot?
In Indian culture, we believe in a universal power called Parabrahm, which is the same as God loosely, the one universal power, which expresses itself as different forms. Those are deities. Those deities visit your life at different points in your life depending on what you need. There's also higher beings, which would be an equivalent of like angels or something. Mm-hmm. Then there's human beings, which are like middle beings, because we are a combination in terms of personality type. We have some good elements, some bad elements. And then there's a spectrum of lower beings. There are ghosts, which we call bhoot, which is a very basic, low-level lower being. And then when you crank up that intensity, almost at the end of the spectrum, one of the beings near the absolute bottom is Asura. The loose translation in English would probably be demon.
Yeah. So let's start with a couple of disclaimers. So hopefully people who have been listening to this, I want to give skeptics plenty of off-ramps to not believe what we're saying.
Yeah.
Right? So like when we talk about things like past lives or whatever, like it's important to remember that there are explanations which are not esoteric that explains this stuff. And I think that should be maintained here too. So this is something that I used to not basically believe in this stuff. And then as we kind of talked about, there's a material world, which is like things that you can quantify, touch, measure. So light, sound, matter. Then there's human beings. We have this brain, and that's like measurable. But then we have the subjective realm. So this is what I call the realm of consciousness. We cannot measure consciousness. We cannot detect consciousness. We cannot measure thought. We cannot measure emotion. We can sort of ask someone for a subjective experience of emotion, but we cannot externally measure it. We require a human being to access their own consciousness in order to tell us what they're thinking and feeling. So that subjective realm actually like opens up. And the whole thing about psychedelics, and you have to decide for yourself, when someone encounters an otherworldly being, when they're on a psychedelic trip or a transcendental meditation experience, is that real or is it a hallucination of their brain? So I'm of the mind that it's real. And the reason that I believe that is because of certain personal experiences I've had, meditation, encountering weird things, right? And even then, when you first encounter it, it feels real, but then you wake up the next day, I'm kind of skeptical about it. Then it happens again and again and again. Then you start to see influences in your life that are what I would call statistical anomalies. And I'm a really good example of this. So I graduated college with a 2.5 grade average, which is like around between a C and a B, okay? It took me 5.5 years to finish my undergraduate education. Normally it's supposed to take 4 in the US. And the percentage of people with my stats who end up in medical school is like less than 1%. The percentage of people who end up at Harvard is even smaller. And so when I look at my life, it's a statistical
Anomaly.
It's an outlier, which can be, statistical anomalies exist all the time. But what I think of is when I was 21 years old and I went to my guru and I said, can you teach me a mantra? And he said, what do you want? He said, are you more interested in material success or spiritual success? And I said, can I have both? And he said, sure. So he taught me a particular mantra. I've been doing that mantra for 22 years. I personally believe that this mantra is responsible for a lot of my success. So I don't think, like, people will look at me and they'll think like, oh my God, you're so great, right? People will say, you've said, oh my God, you're such a gift to us. Wow, tell me more. Ranveer, how I'm beautiful, tell me. I'm great.
You've got a great hairline.
Yeah, tell me how I'm amazing.
You've got beautiful skin.
So my whole thing is that I'm not special. The only difference between me and other people is that I have access to knowledge and techniques. I was given knowledge and techniques about how the mind works, how to accumulate energy, all this kind of stuff, right? And I employ those techniques. And then I have patients. And when I employ those techniques with them as well, they see huge improvements in their life. So that's why I believe this stuff. Is not because I'm special. It's not some weird mystical thing. This has a science to it too. It obeys laws. Okay? Cause and effect karma is not just in the material world, it's in the spiritual world as well. So now let's talk about asuras. So if we look at a human being, I'm like a certain level of consciousness is in the capability that is mental that I have is greater than an insect, which is greater than a plant, which is greater than a stone. Okay? And that consciousness is like a fundamental kind of stuff. There's no amount of matter that can capture the feeling of falling in love. It's just not possible. We can measure blood flow in the brain. We can measure electrical activity. We can't capture the subjective experience in any way, shape, or form. So there's a certain amount of consciousness. Let's say we're 50% matter and 50% consciousness. There are other things that are more conscious and less material. So I don't know that I believe in ghosts at all, but there are beings that exist in that weird subjective space where most of what they are is subjective. That's the other simple way to think about it.
Ooh.
Right? So an asura doesn't have a physical form, but they have intention.
Most of what they are is subjective.
Yes. So their ability to affect the material world is limited. We can affect the material world very easily because we have a material form. They usually don't have, maybe they did in the past, I don't know. This is where like you can read all these texts, it's not clear what's real and what isn't. The limits of scientific exploration, and this is why I'm excited about things like DMT. So I had these experiences and I still didn't know, am I crazy or not? Then I started working with patients who encounter things all the time. Then they started meditating and they started encountering things. And then when they sit with me and I'm like, do you think you're crazy? Do you think this is real? What is this? And by the way, the other thing is, the reason I love psychiatry is I'm professionally trained in recognizing crazy. That's my job. And I know I'm not psychotic. I mean, maybe I am. That's part of it.
Yeah,
but
one of the easy ways that a lot of Indian skeptics brush it off is they say, oh yeah, you believe in ghosts? Actually, I think you're kind of schizophrenic. So all these ghost hunters, all of them are schizophrenic.
So here's the key thing to understand. Psychosis is maybe some of these same elements, but in a pathological way. So we have a human body that's supposed to work in this way. And if it gets ill, it works in this other way, right? But the capacity is still there. So we have this capacity that can be accessed through meditation, psychedelics, and it can be accessed through psychosis as well. And it's really interesting because even when I would talk to my patients who are psychotic, I would be able to connect with them very well because I've had similar experiences. There's a great text by this guy named William James called The Varieties of Religious Experience, where he talks about the similarities between like mental illness and like seeing God, right? Or scholars have sort of talked about people who are religious prophets, or they just mentally ill.
Or ate a mushroom from off the floor.
Yeah, or that, right? So like there's something about, the burning bush being a hallucinogen or something, right? So let's just start with that background. So I think there are beings that exist in this subjective realm. So this is what also makes it impossible, arguably, for science to detect them because they don't have anything that is detectable in the same way that our thoughts aren't detectable. So now we have to ask ourselves, everyone thinks, is that a real thing? It's a real thing, but it's not an objective thing. It's a subjective thing. It's real subjectively, but it doesn't have form and substance. You can't measure it.
It might appear as a different color, shape, form to different people based on their own subjectivity.
Yes, but the fact that subjectivity exists and is different from objectivity, you can still think that's a hallucination. I don't think so. I think subjectivity is real.
Yeah.
And you can explore in that dimension. That's what meditation is. And when you explore in that dimension, sometimes you will encounter otherworldly beings.
You know what you're calling the subjective world? Is it the same as the astral world?
Sort of. So that's where what I'm calling, the reason I use the word subjective world is because everyone has a subjective world. You basically have proof as a person, not as a neuroscientist, But as a person, you have proof of your subjective experience. So what I'm saying is if you explore in that direction, explore your own subjectivity, not measure something with a ruler, but like meditate and pay attention to what happens. Have your body have you can trigger out of body experiences where the feeling of consciousness exists outside of you. And then once you're floating, you literally like keep traveling. And there are other experiences that you can have, like a tunnel opening up, kind of like when people have this near-death experience or when they die and they travel through the tunnel. There are certain Agnya Chakra practices. People in our meditation YouTube community, so when I teach this practice, someone described it as charging the laser beam. So many people, thousands of people had the same experience of like a third eye practice where they feel like there's a laser beam that's charging up. And then if you continue doing that practice, you'll have other weird experiences and you'll kind of follow this tunnel and there's all kinds of stuff that can happen. And then there's things on the other side. It's all going to be in your head. So when you do this stuff, you will sometimes encounter other things. So this is where we also now I'm going to explain a little bit of the metaphysics. Y'all just have to kind of trust me on this. So you have Parabrahman, which is like cosmic consciousness. Sometimes people will talk about it in like panpsychism, that the fundamental substance of the universe is consciousness. And it has matter and energy kind of arise out of it. But there's 3 buckets of stuff. There's matter, which is the most gross form. Then there's energy, right? We have evidence of energy, but we measure energy through matter in many ways. Like, so if you look at like a scale, we'll talk about something like potential energy. There's no thing like potential energy. Energy is just the capacity to do work, but I can't tunnel down into like a weight and find energy there. There are some ways we can measure electricity and things like that. But there's like matter and energy are different stuff. There's a third level of stuff, which is consciousness. So once you start exploring those realms, you're going to encounter, so Parabrahman is like, has no qualities, is just doesn't care about you, doesn't care about who you are, whatever. And then you have like the deities, like the gods, like the Maha gods. So this is like Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And those things, it's hard to describe, but they're like forces. You can kind of think about them like gravity. They actually don't care about you so much. Like Shiva arguably has been meditating for millions of years, is going to annihilate the universe, and he doesn't really care. He's just going to do his thing. Brahma cares about us some, but his job is done. Vishnu kind of cares about us. So even these like conscious beings, they're like lumps of subjective experience, which is the way that you can think about it. But they're really big. And the bigger they get, the less human they become. So Parabrahman is not really human, doesn't care about things. People are like, oh, if God exists, why is there good? Why is there evil? Parabrahman doesn't care about good or evil. Parabrahman says that there's, in the same way that if I have a neutron and I split into a positron and electron, one is positive, one is negative, there's no such thing as good or evil. Karma just has a consequence. So if you do quote unquote bad things, it's not a bad thing. If I start using a lot of drugs, that's going to alter my dopamine circuitry. That's a fact. It's neither good nor bad. It's just a physical fact. Biology doesn't care, physics doesn't care. We're the ones who apply the label of good or bad. There's no problem of evil for Parabrahman. There's no such thing. There's just stuff. We are the ones that place the value judgment. As an aside, that's why things like Advaita Vedanta and stuff will help us, because non-dualism will help us transcend these concepts of good and evil. So then what happens is we think about Parabrahman, which is like pure consciousness, has no form, like no roop. Then we have the gods, like the big gods, and they have a little bit more form. So now we're dividing things into 3 chunks, but they're still pretty primordial. They have certain mantras associated with them, which are like also primordial mantras. Like Om is like the primordial mantra. It has a certain oneness quality. It's not like specific. So if you chant Om, you're not going to manifest a particular thing. You're just going to cultivate like general energy. Then we have the Devas and the Asuras. So these are creatures, as far as I understand, that have more human qualities. But what I've noticed is that some people are able to accumulate Shakti, energy, and they're able to get a lot out of life. They get really lucky. They get into problems and they come out on top. Even when they shouldn't. They can make mistakes, but everything seems to happen to them. They get a lot of accomplishment. But here's the key thing about Asuric influence. They're never happy, because an Asura will always take its price. It's going to give you what you want to, but you will never be content. So they'll make $100 million and they'll be egotistical. They need 200. Then they need 1 billion. Then they need 2 billion. And you can observe that there are a lot of people on the planet who have every reason to be content, but they are anything but content. And so there's a very simple psychological explanation for this that has nothing to do with ASURAS, right? These people are narcissistic. We talked about toxic fuel. So the narcissistic drive causes them to push to succeed, but they're never going to be content because they have a narcissistic complex. You can explain these people with psychology very easily. In my opinion, this is opinion, there's ASURIC influence. Because you can look at this person, you can be like, how can someone be so bad? Says stupid things, does stupid things, does illegal things, and they just get more money and more money and more money. But if you look at these people, you can even tell kind of that they're suffering profoundly. They're not content. They're not happy. There are billionaires that are happy and there are billionaires that are not happy. And you can even just look at Twitter and tell the difference. So what I've kind of observed, and this is why you have to be careful if you're meditating. The reason I started talking about this stuff, I know it sounds insane, is as I started teaching people meditation that is a little bit more esoteric, and my students started encountering, they'd come to me and they'd say, hey, I met this thing. What's going on? And I don't know what's going on, but here's all these texts that say, written by meditators from thousands of years ago that talk about these things. So the reason I teach this stuff is because you need to know. So that if you encounter something, don't treat it like a hallucination, it'll screw you over. Don't make a pact with these things. They'll offer you stuff, right? And if they offer you stuff, say no. So there's a great example of this, which is if you look at the 3rd chapter of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. So Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is this seminal text on you. It's the Bible of yoga. It teaches the basics of yoga. So he'll teach you what an asana or yoga posture is. He says an asana is 2 things. It's a position that's stable, and it's a position that brings your mind to the present. That's all an asana is. And if you look at every yoga posture on the planet ever been developed, it follows these 2 rules. Stability brings your mind to the present. So he teaches all this basic stuff about yoga. Here are the different states of consciousness. So there's sleep, there's dreamless sleep, there's dream sleep, there's wakefulness. He teaches you other things here's why truthfulness is important, here's why this. And he's just explaining all this stuff, right? Chapter 3 happens. By the way, if you do this technique, you'll be able to travel through time. If you do this technique, you'll be telepathic. If you do this technique, you can shrink yourself to the size of an atom. If you do this technique, you'll be able to increase yourself to the size of the universe. He just lists all these things out, and then he just goes back to the other stuff. He's just listing stuff. There's no clickbaity paywall, right? He's not even taking credit. He's warning people. He's telling people, hey, if you meditate, this stuff will happen. So don't be worried. And one of my teachers, this is a lesson I've sort of learned the hard way. I won't go into too much detail, but one of my teachers told me, even when you have siddhi, so siddhi is perfection or accomplishment. And superpower. When you get these things, you should not use them. They're actually distractions.
Yeah.
So the problem is, and this is something that a lot of people don't understand, they'll say if these people have superpowers, why don't they use them for the benefit of humanity? The reason is because you can't use it for the benefit of it. It'll never benefit humanity. It'll just cause problems. And you can learn this the hard way, right? So I can try as hard as I want to try to help people. I can help people only as much as they're willing to accept. And I can't use a really good example of this is I've got patients whose parents will bend over backwards to pay for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars of addiction treatment. And you can try to give $1 million for addiction treatment. It will not cure someone of their addiction. So even if you think about it, we're talking about ego and ahamkar and attachment. Ego is very hard to get rid of when you use a siddhi. Because now you're saving people, right? Everyone's saying, why don't you save the world? And you're like, yeah. Why don't I save the world? I'm going to save the world. I'm going to help everyone. Really messes you up.
Yeah.
So this stuff happens. It's to be ignored just like everything else in meditation. You just do the practice, means you do the practice, you do the practice, you do your sadhana. You don't worry about what happens. You don't go seeking beings. If you want to have some motivation towards it and you want to do that technique, go for it. You'll learn over time as these things happen that the more you chase it, the more impossible it will be.
The DMT city thing is flashing in my head.
Yeah, right? So DMT is an example of a particular configuration of neurological activation that gives people an extra sensory experience of consciousness. Right?
Do you think that city exists somewhere in the subjective realm?
Yeah. But
And what are the beings that they're meeting?
I don't know, man.
Higher beings or lower beings?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, higher and lower. I use the terminology that I use. I think they're more conscious than material, and their ability to affect the material is limited. Right? So we're like 50% conscious, 50% material. A rock is like 1% conscious, 99% material. An asura is like 90% conscious, 10% material. And that's why there's also a difference. Like, even if you look at some of these like tantric texts, if you look at some of these texts by people like Aurobindo, he'll even say that like a deva is different from a demigod, right? So Shiva is different from Ganesh. Ganesh cares way more about us than Shiva does. And that's because he's actually, Ganesh isn't 100% divine. You know why not?
Why?
There's a part of him that's not divine. Which part?
The elephant head?
Exactly. Right? So he's born of a god and a goddess, except for his head. So he's a little bit material, so he cares about us more. He's a little bit more with us. And so these devas, I think, are like conscious beings that have a lot of power. Asuras, I think that they're at the same level.
Spectrum of consciousness.
Yeah.
And which is also equivalent to the spectrum of objective material.
Right. So they're minimally objectively material, but they are very subjectively accessible, which is why we have no proof of them, because they don't exist in this planet.
Because the limitations of science limit us to the material realm.
So far, right? So the moment that we can scientifically detect and verify a thought, I think that's when we're off to the races. Right?
Will that happen in our lifetimes?
It's not clear to me. I don't know. It's not clear to me that it'll ever be possible.
Okay.
Right? So I don't know. But that doesn't, then you have to decide for yourself whether your subjective experience exists or not. You have to decide for yourself.
Gotcha.
What your answer is.
Gotcha. Thank you for consuming this clip, दोस्तों. अगर ऐसे ही और clips explore करने हैं तो इस channel के playlists को ज़रूर explore करना.